Well, not too long ago, my daughter posted on Facebook, and she had gone through my class when she was like 16, and then she went through it again when she was 18, and then she taught her EMT and became a firefighter and all that kind of stuff. I really liked her posting the other day, and she said she remembers day when the EMT school. The two things that will happen, I'll share this with you. I made her sit on the front row so I could keep my eye on her, and I was watching her, and she's a cute little thing, and I noticed this guy was sitting right next to her, and he automatically was very intrigued by her, and he was going out of his way to help her and give her pencils and all this kind of crap, and he was already starting to talk. And so, anyway, I started the class with stand up, tell us who you are. And this time I started the first, and then let everybody stand up. Anyway, he was next to last, and he stood up, said who he was, and she stood up, she goes, well, my name is Misty Vargas, and I'm through this class, and that's my daddy. And I was watching this anyway, the first thing we put was, at the beginning of the class, I used to show a video. And you guys remember the Murrah building bombing? Well, Garth came up with a video of that, and I used to show that. And in that, she posted that Dad made all of us watch this video, and said that after you watch this video, if you decide you can't do this for a living, then you really need to make some other choices, career choices, because this is what you guys are going to get exposed to. And that meant a lot to her. It really means a lot to me. And she went on to say that, I don't hold anything against you for not being able to. First of all, I respect you for saying I can't do this. Because the bottom line was, and I think I probably said this on day one, is you guys are going to take care of me and my kids. And I want to make sure that you guys are physically capable and academically capable, but emotionally capable of doing this job. Why? We're talking under fire. We're not just talking about bullets and we're talking about those huge emotional hits that you take on a regular basis. And you will take emotional hits every day. Things will come hit you hard. And some will hit you more than others. Okay? And so that's kind of what we're going to be talking about tonight is how to prepare for something. We'll go through the objectives very quickly. No, not anymore. Now, you guys agree with this, that first statement there? That your personal health and safety is vital to the EMT operation. If you guys aren't healthy, if you guys' minds aren't right, and stuff like that, you come to work with your personal baggage, you know, you're going to carry that throughout the shift, and you're not a huge asset to the department. Okay? You need to protect yourself from hazards. Now, those of you that are volunteers, you've been fighting against cars and stuff like that, you know, before we get into bumper gear, and is that a good thing? It is. But is there a better way to protect yourself? Land gear, something that simple. And it's not till here recently that our people said, you know what? If policy says you need to be doing all this stuff to protect yourself, but our guys are falling down from being exhausted. Are we really doing them justice? And we get some waterland here, which accomplishes flash protection. These guys are doing. The answer is yeah. Something simple like that. Okay? Alright. There's a lot. This is just really slow. Something you will have to say. And some of you, again, I don't want to get personal, get in your personal life like that. But most of us probably have had to deal with death at some level. Okay? Probably an older person in our families passed away, and we've dealt with that. And in some cases, like me, and maybe in your life, a very, very personal tragedy in your life. But you're going to be dealing with this every single day you go to work. You may not have it somebody around you every day, but the expectancy is what? That you will. Somebody may die on you. And what you guys need to understand right off the bat is you're not in charge of death. There's only one person in charge of death. Now, we're there, and you're given the opportunity and the privilege to be there when it happens. Okay? The reality is that the person's going to die. If their time is up, their time is up. Now, sometimes the things that we do need to be helpful, and that's why we're here, because we want to help. Okay? The bottom line is, people die on you. Don't kill yourself. Don't beat yourself up over it. Unless, of course, you attribute it like you're giving the wrong medication. Then it's probably your fault. Okay? And understanding that you will have people that will die on you, and understand that going into this field. Okay, and again, like I said, I really believe that times, and I will cite several examples of people that should have died that didn't, and people that should have died that did die, vice versa. Alright, so the first thing you want to do is you're going to be put in a position to have to say and tell that little old 80-year-old lady that her husband is in the other room, they've been married for 50 years, you're going to have to tell her that he's dead. You're going to have to use the terminology, the body language, all that to go in and say, hey, I'm sorry, but your husband is dead. And that in itself is hard to do. The thing that's equally as hard is to make sure you made the right decision. Because I'm not there with you. The doc's not there with you to say, oh, they're dead. My worst nightmare is to go in, call somebody dead, go tell the spouse that they're dead, and then my partner walks in and go, this person's still breathing. They still got a pulse. Okay? To make an incorrect call when it comes to death. So I'm going to give you some things that you can look at that say, okay, I wouldn't use this criteria to call them dead. These are probably the absolute criteria to call them dead. But the first one we're going to talk about is, just because they don't have a pulse or not breathing doesn't mean they're dead. Okay? Especially if the body is cold. Okay? So, if you think of the physical signs of death, we have to use some kind of definition to say, yeah, you're dead. Would you agree that if somebody has no pulse and they're not breathing, that they're dead? Yes, they are. They're either biologically dead, okay, or what?
Clinically.
Clinically dead. They're one or the other, okay? And the only difference between one is Okay, and I'll give you an example. If I'm watching all of a sudden I collapse on the ground, and you guys just sit there, you go, collapsed. The white trim will pop up again, and maybe 10 minutes later, one of you jackwagons get up here and go, you know what? I've been watching him and his chest didn't move, and 10 minutes later you go, you know what? He doesn't have a pulse, he's not breathing. Now am I dead? Well, the second I hit the ground and I didn't have a pulse and I wasn't breathing, I was dead. What kind of dead was I?
You were clinically dead. Okay.
Then 20 minutes later, y'all decide to check on me. I'm non-resuscitatable. I'm what? Y'all wanted the definition of biological death, and by God, you got it now because you jackwagons didn't do anything. All right. All right. Okay. It says if the body is still warm, initiate care. Is that a true statement? Yes or no? It sounds like it. But guess what? You could have Granny that dies at midnight. You get a call at 6 o'clock when her husband woke up, and she's been underneath an electric blanket all night. Hey, come on now. Granny's been dead for a while. The body's still warm, but she wasn't producing that warmth. What was producing the warmth? In that case, it was the electric blanket. Now, I would agree with that one. If hypothermia is present, initiate care. What does that mean? That means that the core temperature is below acceptable limits. Okay? Core temperature, if it gets really, really cold, is a hypothermic death necessarily a bad thing? I'll tell you one thing. If I had to die, I would rather be hypothermic than hyperthermic. Okay? Because in hypothermia, what can happen? What does the body try to do? Its metabolism slows down. There's something called the make-and-die reflex. Basically, your body is still shunting blood to your vital organs, your heart, your liver, your kidneys, and all that kind of crap. And so, you put somebody that's got a core temperature of 86, yeah, they're dead. But when you get them, you're going to resuscitate them, right? En route to the hospital, yes? And when we get them to the hospital, what do you think the hospital is going to do? They're going to warm them up to what? The normal core temperature of 98.7, and if they still don't respond with appropriate resuscitative measures, then guess what? I'm okay as a physician calling you dead. I gave you every opportunity. All right? Okay, so don't assume that just because they're unresponsive to painful stimuli, they're dead. Okay? Lack of pulse. Man, their pulse could be really, really slow. Absence of breath sounds. I can have a bad asthma attack and you won't hear me breathe. Absence of movement. And no blood pressure. My wife takes care of open heart patients, and she says sometimes when they come out and they're kind of going into their reentry perfusion, their blood pressure can be like 40/20. If you and I saw blood pressure of 40/20, we do what? Holy crap, right? She goes, oh, I don't worry about that too much. I kind of watch them. If they stay there, then I'm worried about it. But I understand it's a reentry perfusion kind of process, right? All right, dependent lividity. Does anybody know what that means?
Isn't that blood fluid?
That's blood fluid, exactly. So, the example would be if I die on the ground and I am in a face-up position, which is called what? Supine, okay? And I'm dead there for 20 minutes or half an hour a day or whatever. You come and roll me over. What's going to happen when you see the bottom half of my body? There's going to be a lot of pooling, and it looks like bruises and discoloration back there. That's called dependent lividity. Okay? Profound cyanosis, which means the body is blue all over. Decreased body temperature. All right, let's get to the definitive. In other words, I want to walk away saying, yeah, Grandpa is dead. Okay? So, when they have an obvious mortal injury, that leaves a little room for interpretation, right? What does a mortal injury mean to you? So, decapitation, or maybe half the skull is missing, which I'll agree that's an obvious mortal injury. Okay? Body severed, body's completely incinerated. So So, I mean, we can kind of go on with this. Body's crushed underneath the caterpillar. Okay, there's a lot of things that we say, okay, they're dead, we're not going to do anything for them. Now, what makes this difficult for you guys, trust me, is when you get on the interstate and you have a rollover and you have a kid trapped underneath a car and you're going through and triaging and making contact with all the patients, and then there's a kid right there that's dead. Because none of us, trust me, none of us want to see a dead kid on scene. And we sure don't not want to do something for them. But the reality is, you may have to. You may have to put yourself in a position one day where you're not going to do anything for them. Now, we had a case where we had a kid that was dead on scene, and the medics covered them up like they should have. And then what happened is the crowd became rowdy because they wanted something to happen on behalf of that kid. And so the decision was made for crew safety that we would take the kid against our better judgment, load him in the ambulance, and just transport him to the hospital. Okay? If that prevents a riot, so be it. Do we have to resuscitate the kid around? Because we all know
He's dead.
he's dead. We're not going to bring him back. That's an obvious mortal injury. So again, all we really did was provide transportation and get him on scene. Okay? Rigor mortis is what? Stiffening of the body. Now, how long? Probably going to ask somebody's going to ask a question. How long does it take for rigor mortis to set in? Does anybody know that? The answer is it kind of varies. And there's a lot of factors associated with that. And some of the factors are their underlying health, obesity, meds, the environment they were in. So there's a lot of factors here. Now, it can take as little as 2 hours, and it can kind of go up from that point. So the areas where you start to see some rigor mortis first, you're kind of like in the facial muscles, and then the fingers and stuff like that, and it just kind of moves on from there. So when you got locked elbows, both of them are locked like that, it's probably larger muscles. That's going to take a little bit longer for them. So if the legs are locked up, you know, they've kind of been dead for a while. Okay, decomposition of the body. Now, when do we call a medical examiner? Well, and these are just kind of some things we want to think about. If you have a dead on arrival or dead on kind of the scene, if there is no known cause of death. Now, again, is it up to you to decide whether or not this patient is going to get an autopsy? The answer is no. Who makes that decision? In this case, the justice of the peace. The justice of the peace, along with maybe some suggestions we make, is going to help make that decision. Obviously, if there's a suicide, because I really don't know if it's a suicide. It could be a homicide that looks like a suicide. Okay? Violent death, poisonings, accidents, criminal acts, obviously. Now, I think it's really important that we understand that you guys really need to understand that these cases will come to consequences. When are they going to come back on? Yeah, probably a year, 2 years. My wife got a call the other day about a sexual assault case 7 years later. And you got to remember what happened 7 years ago. Remember what happened the last shift. Okay? Make sure you document well. Okay. I'm just going to bring them all up. Okay. Now, the stages of grieving, when we talk about grieving, it could be the patient, it could be the family, okay? When you get there, expect that there could be a variety of emotions that they present, okay? Some people, again, may go all the way to the, if you go in and somebody's got terminal cancer, and they've been watching Dad slowly die for the last 6 months, do you think they're going to be in the first 4 stages of this grieving? No, they're probably going to be where? I'm glad. I'm not glad he's dead, but I'm glad he's no longer suffering. So you need to take this into consideration. You may see any of these reactions at any given time. Okay? Okay, so what are some of the things that you guys can do that's going to help you, because at the end of the day, you got to walk away with your sanity in check. And you've got to be able to come back next shift and do this all over again. So that's kind of what we're getting at. What allows me? How am I going to give myself up to come back? 2 years later, 10 years later, 28 years later, to keep doing this. After all this stuff that I've seen. All right. So you can do some helpful things that really kind of help you. If I'm working with younger crew, I know this may be the first time they've seen that. So I'm going to use kid gloves when I'm dealing with them. I'm going to consider their reaction. Okay, my reaction is going to be probably totally different than their reaction, right? So I need to shelter them. I need to protect them. Okay? And sometimes, you just got to get hard-ass, because sometimes these guys, gals, will start exhibiting signs of that I've got to be tough because I don't want to look like a baby in front of my captain, so I got to look tough. In the process of doing that, they start doing goofy stuff they don't realize they're doing. And everybody's watching you. Okay? Recently we had a industrial accident. We had a gentleman that got caught up in a spool. And it's huge steel. What's that?
I was there.
You were there? You worked there?
I was working there when they were building the machine. I was walking by to go to the restroom.
And he was crushed under extreme pressure. Okay? And what I told the guys, because we had a lot of the people upstairs, and I was part of the grief counseling group and things like that. And we happened to be in an upstairs room, and that window happened to look out, and you could see our entire crews. You could watch what they were doing. And I was just saying, oh God, please don't let them do anything stupid or what looks stupid to the people that are grieving right now. And they could have been, in their effort to try and overcome what they were feeling, they could be talking about a football game or something they did, and they're high-fiving each other. And then the crowd sees that, and they're thinking, why are these guys high-fiving each other? It has nothing to do with the case. So again, you have to be careful, what you're, the signs that you're exhibiting, because that really can be thought of as just being crude, okay? Again, make helpful, simple suggestions, be yourself and sincere. And I would say this, and please forgive me, be yourself and sincere unless yourself is an asshole, okay? If that's your personality, and I say this because that's me, okay? Don't nod your head like you agree. She goes, golly. No. I had a motor vehicle collision, and I was a medic in charge of this patient, and I got in the car with this lady, and I'm talking to her, and right away there was just the wrong chemistry. We just weren't getting along. We were like husband and wife. We were just spatting and kind of stuff, and I said, excuse me. And so I walked out, and I got my partner and said, I need you to go take care of her. Different person, different chemistry, much better reaction. Okay? So again, if you're having a bad day, they're having a bad day, and it's not working, don't keep pushing it. Put somebody else in there and let them work through it, okay? And that's when we talk about being able to shift on the fly and make some different decisions, that's some of the things you need to do. Don't let your freaking ego get in the way, because the ego will get you in trouble faster than anything else, okay? Okay, again, I think it's prudent that we act in a calm manner, because somebody, when they call you guys, and after a while, when you're riding out with these people, you're going to ride out with these medics, and they go, oh great, somebody fell. Oh great, somebody thinks they're having a heart attack. We got to go help them now. Okay? Understand that this is a very bad thing for them. When somebody calls you, they called you because they're having a bad day. And your job is to make their day better. And the way you make it better is through your actions, your body language, your performance, your attitude. All that is going to make the day better for them. And you have to be calm. Okay? If you're not calm and you're excited and you're nervous, do you think they sense that?
Yes.
They sure do. And they're going to be concerned, they're going to be paying more attention to you. Now you're on, so it's kind of like putting a huge spotlight on you, like, you're the theme today, okay? You should show concern about their privacy, and respect their wishes. You should respect their wishes, as long as it's a reasonable request, right? I mean, we're not going to do everything the family says, but if it's a reasonable request, then we need to do that. Be honest. If somebody says, "Is mommy dead?" and you know mommy's dead or mommy's dying, should you be honest with them? And if so, how are you gonna do it? How are you gonna say it? What's that?
Depending on the person.
Well,
If it's a kid, then very carefully and very...
well, what are you gonna say? I just want give me some words, some terminology. What are you gonna say? They're dead.
We've done everything we possibly can in our aspects to try to help.
Well,
She's leaving.
you know, again, that's kind of, and that's safe, and that's generic. But what I have a habit of doing is I'll go in and I'll make contact with a family member and I'll say, "Mrs. Johnson, your husband, his heart's not working, he's not breathing, we're giving him medications, he's not responding to our efforts. We're going to continue to do what we're doing right now, but right now he's very critical and things don't look well." Is that okay to say that? Does that seem reasonable? Now, I'm doing my part into taking him down the direction of what? Preparation. You need to be prepared for the next thing is, the doc's going to tell you that your husband's dead, but right now we're doing everything that we can. I mean, the last thing you want to do is go in there and say, "No, I think they're going to be okay." No, I don't know that they're going to be okay. So be careful with what you say. And again, that's part of that. Don't create the false hope.
So since we can't pronounce someone dead until there's actually someone there that can pronounce them dead.
So the question is, can we pronounce people dead? The answer is no. But can we identify death? The answer is yes. So what happens if we show up and Granny's been dead for a day, okay, and the husband doesn't want to accept that, but he knows it, he just doesn't want to accept it? Then we say, okay, they're dead. We're calling them dead because we're not going to do anything. And so step 2 is we call a justice of the peace who comes in and makes a formal pronouncement and signs the death certificate and the time, date, stamp, and all that kind of stuff. Okay. So these are just some of the concerns of the critically injured or dying patient. You think they have some anxiety? And how is that going to look to you? It's going to look like they're really pissed off. They're going to be short with you. They're going to holler at you. They may curse at you. They may do a bunch of stuff. And the worst thing that you can do is react to that on a personal level. You're going to have some kind of reaction. I'm not going to tell you you're not. But don't allow it to get you on a personal level. Because when you allow it to let you get you on a personal level, then you're kind of focusing on them instead of patient care. Okay? So you've got to build up some kind of system that allows you to filter that through that crap. I have a nurse, her name is Virginia, she works in the emergency department. And she had this combative patient one time, and she started IVing and said, "You stupid son of a bitch, you can't do shit right now." I mean, just hammering her. The whole time is just nailing this lady. And she's the whole time going, "Okay, sweetheart, that's okay. It's all right, baby." I'm going, how do you do that? What would you guys do? Well, I mean, I have like 25 different personalities in here. You're like, you ain't talking to me like that, kind of thing, right? But again, you are doing what? Those of you that are saying, "I'm not going to put up with that crap," you are taking it on a personal level. And you've got to be able to kind of separate the two. All right, pain and fear, anger and hostility. And that anger and hostility you see sometimes is nothing more than what? You say? What did you say? Guilt. Exactly. It's guilt on their part, right? Because our little kid drowned on my shift. You know what I'm saying? I was supposed to be watching the kid and I fell asleep and we found the kid drowned in the back. They're not going to want to accept responsibility. They're going to feel guilty, and their guilty is going to look like again, anger and hostility, okay? Okay, here we go. All right. I think these are pretty basic things. You should avoid sad and grim comments. Things like, man, I've never seen anybody fracture that bad, or I've never seen anybody burn that bad, still breathing, you know? I have a video that I used to show, and I'll see if I can find it. But in the video, an individual is driving down the highway at night, and there's a semi-tractor trailer pulling a crane. Now the crane has got balancing weights on it to keep the crane balanced. Well, he hit the bridge and knocked off one of the balancing weights, fell on the interstate. Here comes the car, hits the balancing weight, and erupts in flames. Fire gets there. When they get there, by the time they get there, the car is 100% incinerated. It is burned from the front bumper to the back bumper. It is just a shell of a car. And as they're hosing it down, they hose somebody behind the steering wheel. And they go, my God. And they're saying things like, oh my God, I've never seen anybody that badly burned, and they're dead, and they're toasty, and all that kind of stuff. All of a sudden, the body starts moaning. And so this patient is 100% third-degree burns, charred skin, and still alive. This is still working, okay? And imagine the last thing they probably remember is these sad, grim comments. So just kind of be careful what you say. And again, there's just the potential to record you is out there. Everything you say is pretty much recorded. Police officer shows up, he's got a recorder on. So watch what you say. They got cameras everywhere. People pop out their phone and recording what you're doing. Okay? Now, why do you think it's important to orient the patient? Can you imagine being in the back seat of the family car and you guys are going on vacation, all of a sudden, the next thing you know, you're laying in the middle of the interstate, you've been asleep for 3 hours, and then all of a sudden you see my ugly mug over you in the back of an ambulance, and you're looking up and you got the lights looking at you. You have no idea what the hell happened. You don't know where you're at. You don't know anything about your family, about their well-being, nothing. So you need to orient the patient and tell them what's going on. Don't assume they knew they were in a wreck and what the conditions of other people are. So it's helpful to orient them. Now along those lines, if they ask, where's my family, and you know that they're the only surviving member of that wreck, should you tell them that their loved ones are dead? Okay? And I have a different view on that. Generally, I'm going to say things like, they're being taken care of by another crew. And here's what I'm going to consider. If both of them are still in the car side by side, and it took us 20 minutes to get there, and they saw their loved one was dead, do they know their loved one is dead probably? Yeah, they've been watching them for the last 20 minutes. They know they're dead. Okay? Again, I think I would kind of err on the side of, they're being taken care of by another unit. And I'm not ever going to say that I'm not going to say to them, yes, your loved one is dead. Okay? Okay? Again, is it important to acknowledge the seriousness of the condition? I think I kind of gave you some examples of maybe that's not such a bad thing. And again, I think the thinking now is that we allow family to see our efforts. In the past, it was like as soon as something bad happened and we got there, it's like, get the hell everybody out. But again, if you allow them to see what's going on, is that somewhat helpful to them? It could be. Okay? It could be helpful to them. Okay? Now, is it our responsibility to locate and notify family members? You may have to assume that responsibility. Okay? And again, be very careful what you say and who you say it to. And make darn sure when you're giving information that you're as accurate as you can be. So think about some of the things that may affect their reaction. In some cases, socioeconomic background. And we look at people that are educated and uneducated, and things like that. Fear of medical personnel could be one of the factors that you got to look at, especially with kids. Okay. All right. This thing is moving slow. All right, we're going to move to something called critical incidents. Okay. And critical incidents is an event that occurs, okay, that just turns your world upside down. Now, it's not going to turn everybody's world upside down, but for whatever reason, it affected you. And like some of the things we just talked about. And generally, some of the things that can lead to critical incident is a mass casualty incident. And a mass casualty incident, by definition, is one where you have more patients than you have providers. Okay, so if you had a train that had a school bus loaded with kids, okay, at an intersection, would that be a mass casualty incident? Now, do you think that would cause a critical incident for a lot of people? The answer to that, absolutely. Why? Because of the number of patients, the condition we're going to see them in, and obviously it's because they're kids. Okay? Let me ask you this, and I don't want you to take it the wrong way, but would you have the same reaction if this were a bus full of older people? Well, who said prisoners? There might be something that, you know, that might make it less dramatic in your life, okay? But again, and different folks, different strokes here, okay? Again, the traumatic injury or death of a child is something that really, man, that just kind of turns our world upside down. In fact, we had a critical incident that we did with one of the local fire departments, and a lot of the people that responded to that call were just to the point where they couldn't function, not very well anyway. And so what we did is a critical incidents debriefing, and in that what we do is we get professionals that go in, and their peer group support, and so we go in and start talking to these folks, and we have an open forum, and we actually say to you, what is bothering you about this case? And you say, well, I was a fireman on engine 3, and my job was to wash down the blood. Okay, have you washed down blood before? Yeah? Well, why is this different? Well, I had to wash his brains off the side of the highway too. And so again, as bad as that sounds, you need to say that. You need to get that out. Okay? And what's going to happen is you, at the same wreck, you're going to feel a little helpless too. But when you hear what he said, you're going to go, oh my gosh, there was brains on the highway? There's no way we could have done anything to save him. You see where we're going with this? Is it allows us to go, okay, and there really isn't anything that anybody could have done. And so hopefully when you get ready to re-enter, you're going to be in much better shape. A wreck, you guys know MVA stands for motor vehicle accident, okay, caused by EMS personnel. And a serious injury of death or death of a coworker, that's really, really hard. When people go down and they're part of your team, that's a difficult pill to swallow. Okay, so what is critical incident stress? Well, it was again, it was something that was started back in the 80s, and I'll tell you where it came to play in our community was as a result of the Luby's massacre. How many of you guys remember Luby's massacre? Several of you do. Okay. Right after that, we had the first critical incident stress management course taught here. And it was kind of interesting that when we went through that, a lot of the responders that responded to that event came to that class because they wanted to be able to help. The reality is they never actually were diffused. They never got the help they needed. And when they were going through that class, a lot of stuff came back. They were overwhelmed by it. So we actually had to do a diffusing for that group of people. And so one of the things we found out is that when we were talking to these people, and we went around and sat and asked what bothered you the most. One of the providers said that what bothered me the most is I walked into that cafeteria and all I saw was these green napkins over people's faces. And what that actually meant is somebody had gone through and triaged them, and if they covered their face, that was a sign of death. He said he saw a sea of green napkins over faces. Another provider said, for example, you know, what bothered me the most was that alarm on the back door, that emergency alarm when people were trying to escape. That bothered me the most. And as he said that, one of the other guys said, I never even heard that. So some different things will impact you. A different part of your sense will be activated, and for some people it won't be activated. So it's kind of interesting. Now, what this is again designed to do is to help us, okay? And let me ask you something. If let's say half of you guys responded to that school bus wreck, that imaginary school bus wreck that we talked about. Some of you are police officers, some of you are dispatchers, some of you are ER technicians and nurses, maybe a couple of doctors and firefighters and police officers. So that's what makes up this group. And by the way, when you have a critical incident stress debriefing, the only people that are allowed to attend that are who? Those of you that were directly related to this event. Now, if you were part of this, do you want some jackwagon that heard about it coming to your session and hear what you've got to say?
No.
You don't. You weren't there, so I don't want to hear what crap you got to say. Only people who need to be there are the ones that were involved. So again, you people were involved in this event. Do you want to talk to psychiatrists?
Nope.
And you want him to lead this discussion? Well, he's probably going to lead this discussion, but are you going to feel more comfortable if there's a mental health professional running this, but part of the people that are helping are, well, I've got somebody from the dispatch community that's trained. I've got somebody from the police officer that is trained. I have some firefighters trained and some paramedics trained. You see where I'm going with that? So you've got other helpers in this group, and they're all from the different venues. Now you're more likely to do what? Express your feelings, okay? And so that's kind of how it's set up, right? Okay, so some of the components too are pre-incident stress education. That's kind of what we're doing right now. And by the way, I'm going to go ahead and say it. There's a really good book that part of our promotional process in the fire department we were required to read, and it has to do with stress. And if you'd like to read the book, I have it. It probably, if you sat down and read from cover to cover, you could probably read it in about 4 hours. And so if you guys want to kind of rotate it between you, I think it's a really good book to read because it talks about a lot of different things. It talks about critical incident stress. It talks about your sleep cycle. It talks about your type A personality. It talks about you and your focus, and sometimes you omit what your family's thinking. And that, and unfortunately, I'm going to tell you right up front, this area of operation has a high rate of divorce. And again, it's because we leave out the other half, okay? And so you really got to, if you're going to leave them out, because they're not part of what you do, at least educate them, and they know what you're going through and vice versa. And for that reason, you need to kind of read those kinds of things that might be helpful in your career. That's if you want to keep a healthy relationship with your significant other. And I'm not saying you won't if you don't read the book. It's just, again, it's just helpful. All right, on-scene peer support. What's probably the best way to stop a bad event from getting worse? Do I have to go through this formal critical incident stress thing that we just talked about? Some of the ways you deal with stuff is you talk to somebody you trust, right? And it could be your partner, it could be some kind of pastoral type person, so somebody that you trust. And so, again, a lot of times what we would do is when we were trading shifts from the next morning, we would talk to the incoming crew and tell them what we had and how we responded to it and what we did. and they would engage in conversation, and that really was really helpful sometimes. One-on-one support is really kind of helpful too. And the last one I want to talk about is the diffusing, and I'll give you a pretty good example of that. Okay, we had an incident where our crews responded to a possible suicide attempt at a high-rise with elderly patients. So again, when you think of a high-rise event with old people, you're thinking, okay, they're probably taking a bunch of pills. So the crew arrives, and they get to the door, and there were 3 in the crew. They walk to the door, right about where you're sitting. As they all 3 walk in, they notice the man has a gun underneath his chin right here. And so one of the members of that crew was a very senior medic, and he grabbed the other 2 and said, okay, let's step out of here. And he did the absolute right thing, because now what we're going to do is what? Let's get out, let's get to a safe place, we'll call for the police, and we'll wait for this thing to get taken care of. Well, one of the members in that group had just completed paramedic training. And so new paramedics, unfortunately, in some cases, think they're odd shots. So he said, you know what, I went to class, we talked about this, I know how to manage this, and before he knew it, the guy had gotten away from him and went back in the room. And the second he opened the door and looked around that corner, what do you think happened? That medic heard a bang. And so, of course, he's thinking, oh my God, did my partner get shot? Or did the guy shoot himself? And in this case, the guy happened to just shoot himself. All right? So the chief calls me up and says, okay, this is the incident we have. We obviously can't wait 2 days later for a debriefing, so we're going to have a diffusing. I need you to assess these guys, I need you to talk to these guys, and I need you to give me a recommendation on what to do for these guys. So again, part of my job was to talk to them, find out what happened, and not point fingers, because it would have been real easy for me to really show my true colors and say, you were an idiot, but I didn't say that. I just said, you know what? The guy was in a lot of pain. He wanted somebody else to feel the pain at the level he felt, and he was going to kill himself one way or the other. Okay? And so my job was to get to determine where he was at and what was the best care for him, what his care plan was. In this case, you know, we talked about touchy-feely, huggy, kissy, smoochy, that kind of stuff. And I told my chief, I said, you know what, I like this guy. I don't like him that much. I'm not going to kiss him and hug him. So let's send him home, let him spend some cute time with his wife, and let's see what happens when he comes back next shift. And in this case, that happened to be probably the best thing for him. So he got to go home, not without pay, just, hey, you had a bad day. We all had a bad day, you know. In this case, we just sent them all home. Why did we send them all home? Because if we would have said he needs to go home, we're isolating him, right? Let's just send everybody home and let him take the rest of the shift off. Okay. So diffusing again is somebody walks by and throws a stick of dynamite in here. What do you want to do?
Defuse that.
We'll defuse before it explodes. Okay, and again, that CISD stands for Critical Incident Stress Debriefing, which we talked about. You know, and if you read that book I was talking about, what you're going to find out is they don't put that CISD in such high favor anymore. They're saying that we actually have greater coping abilities than we think we do. Okay. All right, so what are some of the things, if you're working with a partner on a regular basis, okay, what are some of the things you might look for that tells you they're having problems? Well, these are the ones that we're talking about here. These are just some of the physiological things that the person, the individual themselves may notice. So these are some things you need to look for. You go, you know what, there was a kid killed, I went to that call, and I just haven't been the same since, okay? And you notice some of these things are happening to you. You never had high blood pressure before, but now you have it, okay? You just have some things that are bothering you, all right? And there we go. All right, so here's some of the stress warning signs. So these are things that you as his partner need to be looking for. So irritability towards the family, friends, and coworkers are just totally irritable. I noticed, and I never would have admitted it, but after Nolan passed away, I noticed that I became pretty irritable, and to these group of people too. You know, you would have thought it was just a lot of pain, but you know, I actually went through that. There's some concentration issues, nightmares, anxiety, you know, unable to make decisions, and the list just kind of goes on. Obviously, there was a big isolation phase for me. I really didn't care to be around a lot of people. In fact, I noticed that I would go to the station and go in my room and the crew knew that. They knew that, you know, we needed to give him some time and space. All right, so some stress management, the lifestyle changes. Obviously, these are kind of helpful things. You need to eat healthy. Unfortunately, because of the high levels of stress we face, we like comfort foods. And because we can't eat at a prescribed time, we can't say every day we're going to eat at 12 o'clock. We're going to eat at whenever the public allows us to eat in some cases, okay? Exercise. If you start an exercise, this is what happens to us at the station sometimes. We get ready to work out, and all of a sudden, we get a call. So we got to put our clothes back on. We get back to the station, we start to work out again, and guess what? You get another call. Okay, so you got to have some stick-to-itiveness here, guys. You got to say, you know what, I'm going to work out, or find a better time to work out. In my case, I know that could happen to me. So before I go to work, I'll get up at 6 o'clock and I'll do my workout. I'll run around the neighborhood because I know at least I'm going to get some kind of workout that day. All right. Again, relaxation, whatever it does, whatever floats your boats there. You know, you guys know what 91.3 is, that elevator music. I listen to that crap. People go, why do you listen to that? And I said, it keeps you from killing stupid people. Okay? And again, balance work, family, recreation, and health. It's just a balancing act. Some of the things that you might be able to do is if you're having a lot of stress, then you know you might request an assignment to a less busier station, as an example. Okay. My sister-in-law, when she finally went back to work after Nolan passed away, she was a manager, and she worked for the public, and she knew she eventually had to go back to work. So one of her things was, hey, I can't be around people right now. Can you give me another job? And they put her in the back where she wasn't working with people, and that really kind of helped her get back into the point where she could open up a little bit more every day. All right, we all kind of know that. Do you think your blood sugar levels decrease or increase when you're exposed to stress? Your blood sugar levels really increase. In fact, and I'll give you this example and we'll take a break. My wife, I said, take care of open hearts, so the fresh hearts, as soon as they come out of surgery, that's kind of her job. And they have an insulin protocol. And what that really kind of means is a lot of these patients, since their body's been attacked by surgery, their body's really stressed. So the body gets stressed. What will happen is they check their blood sugar, and their blood sugar is what? Elevated above acceptable limits. So they start giving them insulin. Why are they giving them insulin? Because they're diabetic? No, because it's a response to the attack on the body. It's a response to stress. And it doesn't mean they're going to leave the hospital as a diabetic now. It's just you were on insulin based on protocol because of the stress to your body. All right, let's take a break.
I've seen that I don't know how long it's been out there where it actually keeps the heart pumping.
We're going to speed through a lot of this stuff right here. I don't know, we need to talk about that. Yeah. That's the physiology. All right. We talked about body substance isolation, and one of the things we need to do is protect yourself on a personal level. And we talked about immunizations and things like that. But body substance isolation is just your hardware, your gloves and your gowns and your eyewear and stuff like that. Your protection. And again, body substance isolation just kind of assumes that all body substances are infectious. So the clear stuff, the bloody stuff, the discharges, all that kind of stuff, we got to assume that stuff's infectious. Okay? And you can always say, I mean, I can remember, I came from the era where we didn't use gloves, and you never wore gloves, and you weren't doing your job if you didn't walk in the ER with blood from your fingertips to your elbows. I mean, you were doing your job, and you didn't mind getting blood on you. So it was a very difficult transition for me to start wearing gloves, because I felt like, on a personal level, I was isolating that patient. And you really kind of are. That's what you're doing. You're isolating them, okay? And one of the things that helped me is I said, well, you know, these are gloves that protect you too. There's nothing that says I didn't come to work with something and you've got a weakened immune system, and I really don't want to give you anything. And by the way, I've been working with sick patients all day long. So I really don't want to give you anything that cross-contaminates you. You see that first bullet, hand washing is your best protection? That's a test question. So it may ask things like, what's the best protection for against infectious disease? Is it, you know, immunization, blah, blah, blah? No, the answer is hand washing. So remember, wash your hands before and after patient contacts. And if you wear gloves, remember to use some kind of soap and water. If you don't have that available, some antibacterial, quick stuff. That's what keep that on the injury. We don't have soap and water, so if you have that patient home, we don't do anything, and we're wearing gloves. But beyond that, I'll generally do what they do, and because I'm touching everything in the engine, from the radio mic to the buttons to the computer, and all that stuff is kind of getting transferred if I'm not wearing gloves, okay? There are different levels of masks. particulate air, and they block out 95% of the particulate matter that's out there. So these are the ones you kind of want to wear when you're dealing with highly contagious patients, TB patients, and stuff like that. So, and sometimes you can downgrade to a different level of mask, depending on the kind of patient you're dealing with. Yeah, you want to wear all the protection you possibly can, because at the end of the day, at the end of the shift, you're going home, and you walk in the house, and the first thing that happens is your little 3-year-old daughter comes up to you, she's what's up, Daddy and Mommy, and you're wearing that nasty-ass uniform the last 24 hours. What do you have on that uniform? You have no idea, do you? You can bet there's some cock on there somewhere, but you got something on there, okay? So what should you do? Yeah, you probably need to change your clothes and take a shower, and if your station provides it, you know, and they have washers at the station, wash that stuff at the station, leave the stuff at the station, okay? And don't take it home, okay? How about your shoes? My wife gets mad, she goes, leave, not because she wants the carpet clean, she just doesn't want me bringing that in the house. Leave your shoes in the garage, okay? Because you've been walking through all kinds of nasty environments, and it makes a lot of sense. And then again, you walk to the car and your little rugrat just drops the candy on the ground, and there you go. Alright, and then these are just some of the high levels of protection for different operations. Hopefully we're not having body armor. As far as knee protection, it talks about concealment versus cover. Cover really only hides protects, concealment only hides the body, and cover hides and protects you, okay? So I'd rather get that in a regular than a bush shot. Oh, finally. Got that right. Next slide is the medications. All right. Under the communications section, this is review and ask people why was not successful. One of the things historically I always say is fail in communications. Okay? And so you want to have strong communications starting from the discovery of the event. This lady's walking down and she sees a man laying in the alleyway. She's calling 911. Why does she call 911? Well, she's going to get something like that. She's going to walk up to the police officer and say, hey, there's a guy away. Just something. Dial 911, and then that's what I call rolling. So dispatchers start talking to the information of the person and getting information in a very quick manner, and dispatchers appropriate resources. There's a dispatch center. This is probably one of the larger ones. And again, depending on your community and how many calls you take, within the community, the population is growing. If you look at the population of Belgium County, the population is not near what it was 10 years ago. I mean, look at Killeen and Fort Hood area. And then they add Parker Heights to it, and our population is growing. So, you know, we're not making 6 calls a shift anymore. We're making 10 calls a shift. Okay? And then so is Killeen. I don't know if there's anything new on this that you need to talk about. I think I mentioned that last one. It's called MBT, which stands for Mobile Data Terminal. And all that really is in your unit, like our police officers and our firefighters. I don't know about the EMS units, but they have a computer inside that fire truck. And essentially, when we get dispatched, we look at the computer screen. It gives us the address that we're going to. It gives us very specific information about what kind of call we're going on to. And as they continue to talk to that calling party, they keep sending us notes on MDT. Okay, patients now no longer breathing. Okay, now we've engaged in CISM. Yeah, secondary to shooting and all that on. So another thing that you want to do is you want to communicate with your dispatcher, and things they need to know is the timestamp event. You say, for example, I'm en route, they timestamp that. I've arrived already, they timestamp that. Contact, timestamp that, and you gotta see where I'm going with that. So everything that you do is timestamped in some form or another. For example, in my unit, what I do is I just hit the button on the computer, en route, hit another button that's on scene, another button that we're clear. So that's my timestamp when I hit that button. And some of the things that the dispatch community can do for us, their assistance with mechanical or navigational problems if we're having issues finding a certain location. GPS is just become second nature now. Everybody has GPS, and there's just no reason for us not to be able to find something. Okay, they can give us immediate assistance or information to other agencies that we need, like that. And they can help coordinate units. Part of what they do is if they are dispatching me on a call, and I happen to be out of my district, and they're dispatching me because it's in my district, part of the thing they see on their computer screen is where my unit's located. They go, well, you're not really the closest unit, even though it's in your district, so I'm going to send the next available engine. Other communication networks. You know, we kind of get spoiled to being able to pick up the radio at any given time and talk and say something, and somebody's going to answer me. What happens to tomorrow if we happen to have a tornado on my shift and it knocks out all the communications? Because there's power lines down, there's telephone lines down, there's radio towers down. So, bam, I've lost my communication link. How am I going to get dispatched to these calls that are going to continue to happen? Well, if you're a smart community and you pre-plan, you know that you can't rely on your cell phones. Okay, when the Fort Hood shooting occurred, what happens is all these calls come in on that network. When they get to a certain percentage, it locks it all out, and nobody gets through. Not even text in some cases. So you better have a backup plan. And generally your backup plan is to have some kind of amateur radio club. Those people, are thought of as kind of goofy because they work the hand-lock radios. And man, they're extremely bright, extremely helpful. Okay? And we've actually worked with them just to kind of say what happens when our radios go down. Okay? There's also CISM band, the old truck drivers using the CB radios. That can be commercial broadcast through your local TV stations. So you need to have a good relationship. If you're pissing off Channel 6, when you really need them, they're going to help you. I mean, if you're an incident commander, you go, I don't need to talk to them. No, you always need to engage with with those groups. Again, business radios. We talked about communications and the Federal Communication Commission and their responsibilities. Their responsibility is all radio communication. So anything that has, that capability, they're going to find it. They're going to license it. They're going to approve it. They're going to take your license away because you're doing stupid stuff. They also allocate specific radio frequencies for use by the different agencies, whether it's fire units or police. If you think about it, they also determine who needs to get frequency. If they've got different agencies within their community, and none of these are very far apart. In other words, I only cover 50 square miles. Well, we have EMS. That's what? 10 times that amount. So you think they need a higher band, higher frequency because they're going to be broadcasting to a different, to all sides of their county? The answer is yes. And that's what we're talking about, established limits for transmitter power output. They monitor radio operations, so their job is to, if you're, we're getting complaints that this agency is always using profanity, or they're doing silly things or whatever, then they need to investigate that. Alright, now some of this information will be on the test. A base station is, for lack of better words, it's just a big radio box that's at your station, it's at the hospital, and it has the ability to transmit and receive. In other words, I talk to it and I hear somebody talking back to me. Okay? And it's a base station, so it's a fixed facility. And again, it can be used for dispatching or coordination of medical control. We just mentioned those two a while ago. Geography and terrain influence the installation. So if we're setting up our communication in our community, we want to put it in the valley, and we want to put it up real high where it's broadcasting. And so that's kind of what we do geographically. We look at some of the high points in your community and go, this is probably the best place to put a base station. You can see the power output is higher. It's 42 to 270 watts. And again, there's multiple change bases there. This is a mobile unit. This is unlike the base unit. It's still one of those systems that can transmit and receive. It's got a lower power output, but this again is permanently mounted inside your vehicle like the police car, the ambulance, or the fire truck. Okay, that's a mobile unit. And then stepping down from that is going to be your portable unit, which is your little walkie-talkie or your handheld unit. The power output on this is 5 watts. Again, it has the ability to allow us to communicate. Now, is that going to work as good as the base unit? No, because the power output is much lower, right? I'll give you an example. If I go to a stop and light with one of these, am I going to be able to broadcast out? Most of the time, with certain parts of the hospital, the building and things like that. So we need to have things like repeaters. Repeaters, again, extend the range of mobile and portable units. So if you think about it, if I have a low output, for example, when I go to H-E-B and my son goes and gets groceries, I have something that's got a very low output, 1 to 5 watts. Am I capable of using the portable unit or the mounted unit inside the engine as a repeater? The answer is yes. And that's picking up what? The other repeater, okay? And so that's how I'm able to get out, okay? This is just kind of how the system works. All right, there are satellite receivers. And so you generally connect to the base station repeater by phone lines or microwave relay. We don't use these as much. Our remote consoles. Hospitals use remote consoles because when you call the hospital, they have to have one of these consoles. Again, you're calling them and telling them what kind of patient you're coming in with. Encoder decoders are not as popular as they used to be. And we're using more of the mobile data terminal that we mentioned a while ago. And the example on the right there is the police officers using NDT. Alright, so just some of the common courtesy things, how to use the radio, and things like that, what we'll talk about now. I think it's really important, and people are going to pick up on this fairly quickly, that if you're going to transmit history to the hospital, think about what you're going to say before you grab it. You should have either a report in mind or in front of you. The worst thing that can happen is you start giving me go, oh, stand by, sir, let me give you a vital sign, and you something else. So your report should flow, because the hospitals don't want to say on that radio listen when you talk trash. They want a quick, concise report to get off the radio, and then you go about my rat kill, all you got stuff to do. Right? So, this is what say, you should never transmit without first. In other words, you haven't been listening to the radio, you're the only person using the radio. Make sure you're not wait 2 seconds after keying the microphone before talking. And a good example is I used to say, this is Paramount Vargas. You just pick up the button and you push it. I say, this is Paramount Vargas. All they say is the first part of the that's the test. Alright, so identify yourself on every transmission. Again, speak it close range directly to the microphone, but don't put it right next to you because it's very garbled. You should try to use conversational tone and speed when you're talking. It's kind of hard to do when you've got a really bad patient coming in there. It really is. Alright, you should articulate clearly. A lot of this stuff can get very confusing, and if you have a very difficult voice, it makes it even more difficult for the receiving party. You should use proper English and avoid using codes, things like the patient is 1076. Well, that may mean something to you in your agency, but it means absolutely nothing to that responding or to that person taking the radio call. Because everybody's using their own 10 codes in some cases. And again, we really kind of got away from that stuff. We try not to use it. Okay, when we begin to transport information about the patient, again, know what you're going to say. And some of the things you want to do fairly closely to the beginning of your report are, it says, report the status of important things like your ABCs, their chief complaint, and their vital signs. One thing I do probably before that is I'll identify who I am, my level of training, and my ETA. Now, what do you think I give my ETA right up front? Exactly. If I tell them my ETA is 3 minutes and my report lasts 3 minutes, and I put the ETA at the end of my report, I'm going to be right on top of this. I'm going to bring the patient in. There's no preparation for that. All right. How to use standard medical terminology. Now, you don't want to use medical terminology when you're talking to patients, because you're confused. You don't know this stuff. But it's okay to use it within the medical community. Now, if you're lost and you're not sure what to say, then just use plain language. Okay? Plain English when you start talking. And like I told you guys, I was a very young medic. I just got my license as a medic. And I had a patient that overdosed on Xanax. So I did this and I'm calling. Yes, I have this patient that's overdosed on X-Nax. Okay. Didn't sound very bright, did I? Right. That's really important. It says repeat all orders. If you're unsure what the physician has said, and there's a miscommunication, or they're giving a certain dose, or a certain procedure to do, you're not familiar with that, you should know that, or you don't remember learning it, then ask the physician to repeat it. Especially if they give you a dose of medication, and say, okay, you want me to give 10 milligrams of nitroglycerin? I thought it was 0.4. You see, that's a whole lot more than it should be. And it could be having a brain fart and go, yeah, you're right. Okay. Don't do the ongoing stuff like, hey, are you hearing me? Transition just to say, yeah, are you hearing me? And again, I have developed over here the standard format I used to call them. That my report start with, this is paramedic barring, branch location, I have ETA of 3 minutes. On board I have a cardiac patient, working a cardiac protocol on them, baseline vitals are such and such, the therapies we've done will be there in 3 minutes. So I give an ETA right front, and I give an ETA at the end. So again, if they hear it up front, they heard it toward the end. Again, the things that happen if you don't use the standard format, it's just not a good operation. You're going to have to be really frustrated. Alright, you look at the first statement and it says, the picture you can take by the receiving hospital, the better prepared they will be receiving the patient. You think that's a good statement? Shouldn't you kind of recreate what you're dealing with? Now, how long is it going to take you to recreate that on the radio? It may take a while. Can you just give baseline information, and when you get to the hospital, then you recreate the event for them? Now, you can say, there was a time there when we were allowed to do it, and we would take pictures on scene. In other words, we wanted the physician to appreciate the mechanism of injury and how much damage there was to a vehicle. We weren't doing it for the gore. We just wanted them to know, you see that bump on the forehead? You see how bad this car is cracked up? You think you want to do a CT on this thing? Yeah, I think that's probably the best thing. Okay. To communicate is important, to show off is not. Again, on your patient reports, and this could be that live report you give to the receiving hospital when you get there, the nurse, the doctor, etc. And these are just some of the things you want to relay to them. Again, what the causes are, the mechanism of injury, if there was one. Kind of elaborate on a chief complaint. Yeah, they're talking about they're having some difficulty breathing, but they're also having chest pain with it. And again, these are just other things you can do, like the pulse, and low liver vital signs. Their neurological condition, or their mental condition, because they could have been talking to you clearly, but they were declining in the mental status. So if you establish the baseline is starting to decline, they need to know that. Again, any history about them in their past, any treatment, things that you've done for them, the kind of response they gave you, and any changes again. Alright, with multiple patients, you may sometimes be transporting or calling in multiple patients. You should number each patient. When we're transporting 2 patients, patient number 1 is this. Now, when you use that format, don't go, okay, vital signs on patient 1 are this, and go vital signs on patient 2 are this, when you haven't finished your report on patient 1. So go and finish patient 1, then go to patient 2, and if I have to, give reports on multiple patients, I want to give them the most serious patient first. I'll give you some interpersonal communication skills. I took an interpersonal dynamic of interpersonal communication class through the National Fire Academy's 2-week course. One of the best classes I ever took. And these are just some of the basic things we talked about, but you communicate with people. You want them to understand. You want them to appreciate your presence and vice versa. And some of the things you probably do, and there's different forms of communication. If you want to communicate that you're pissed off, well, there's certain things you do, right? If you want to communicate that I'd like to talk to you and I'd like to get more information from you, you do those kinds of things. Recently, I was visiting my dad, on his knees, but we were having a conversation, and he really needed to engage, he really needed to make my point, and I got on my knees, and he looked at me and goes, I don't like you on your knees. I'm going, I know, Dad, but I need to look in your eyes. I need you to understand what I'm saying. I want to make sure that we don't, So you should make and keep eye contact. That's just kind of a thing that's helpful. That allows them to be listening to them. Okay? How many times have you talked to somebody and they're texting, and they're looking away, and you're going, this jackwag's not listening to me. Okay? You should be confident, and again, confidence is helpful as far as trusting the patient, and they're probably going to be more likely to give you information. That's what they're there for, right? They're there to get information from you. But if you don't inspire them, they're not going to give you information. They'll shut you down. Use proper names unless told to do otherwise. And this is one of my faults. I tend to do this, or I used to do this a great deal, is that when I talk to elderly ladies and things like that, I'd say, honey and sweetheart, babe, and that kind of just try to be nice, but it can be seen as kind of something you probably don't want to do. Just yesterday, we had a patient, and I told the medic that was coming in, this is patient's name. And the next thing he told the patient was, come on, bud, get on the stretcher. And I'm like, oh, man, I almost ripped his head off. I just told you what his name is. His name's not Bud. Okay? And he cleared it up real quickly. I noticed the next thing he said was using his last name. And I didn't have to say anything. It was my body language telling him. And that's one of the things I really don't care for, is when you say things like, hey, Bud, or Buster, or whatever, when clearly you found out what their name is. And again, you should be conscious of cultural differences with the patients that you pick up. Believe it or not, we had to do an inspection at one of the churches, and it's the Hindu church. And they don't like footwear. You can't wear footwear. So my crew and I, we went in there to do an inspection. Is it going to hurt me to take my shoes off? No, not really. Is that something that is going to facilitate a better communication between you and I? I think so. All right. Interpersonal communications, again, be courteous and please and thank you and just respectful. Yes, ma'am. No, ma'am. Yes, sir. Things kind of. If you want a job, you want to project your best manners, don't you? Pretend like you're on a job interview when you're talking to these patients. All right. Now, is this guy really somebody you want to engage with? I don't want to see this guy. Because I look at this guy and going, you know what, I'm not going to give you the time of day. Because that's what he's telling you. He's telling you based on his communication, hurry up, tell me what you got to tell me so I can get the heck out of here. Okay? Along those lines, remember what we talked about is use terminology that the patients understand. And one of the temptations will be that once you get out of here, you start using medical terms, and you're probably using that with your family already or people around you. You're going to want to use that on patients, and again, they may not understand what you're saying. Even though you're talking correctly, you talk correctly, but you talk to the wrong audience. All right? There's a time to do that. Be careful about what you say about the patient and where you say it. And again, obviously, you want to really be aware of your body language. It says a lot. What do they say? That 80% of communication is what? Body language. Okay? Again, slowly and enunciate. And you should allow patient time to answer questions. And if you're an inpatient person, this is something you're going to have to work on. Especially when you talk to the elderly and you talk to them and you're trying to get information and they're not forthcoming fast enough for you. In some cases, you may have to bump them along, and that's what I do. If they're kind of taking their time and go, and I might repeat the question or I might rephrase it a different way, so it kind of prompts them to make a decision about what I'm asking. All right, when you speak to the non-English speaking population, be prepared to use interpreters. We've kind of gone through those cycles that we used to use anybody that spoke that language, and we kind of, because of HIPAA, we've gone away from that. And so now what we do is we use more professional levels of interpreters. So we can certainly use a family as an interpreter. The other thing we can do is, when we talked about using services, you have a contract with a company. Again, you call them and say, I have a patient that speaks Czech only. Can you put a Czech interpreter on the phone? Okay. If you're not sure, despite what you've heard, that if I put a phrase in front of a word that means something to them, that may not be, okay? So if you're not sure how to use the language, then don't do it. Flashcards, okay, but they're just really slow. If you're going to use flashcards in your systems, then I would suggest you memorize them. You know those flashcards. Because a lot of those are just kind of point. Like if you want them to know something about their stomach, you find the human body and point to the stomach. And there's all kinds of symbols on the flashcards, and it takes a while to navigate through those. Sometimes you deal with a hearing impaired. You may have to use an interpreter. My stepdad, his hearing is horrible. And I noticed my mom, she starts talking to him. I said, Mom, he just can't hear you. And the louder you talk, the distorted it becomes to him. I said, look at him when you talk to him. I said, right there, yes, do his lips. So people make up the fact that they can't hear, they are looking for you to look at them so they can process what you're saying by reading your lips. All right, with kiddos, probably better to get on the eye level. You should approach them slowly. Don't put a pain on them because you're going to scare them. Because if you are trying, okay, and parents are looking at them, then I notice they're clear as strangers. Avoid postures, things like that. Because when mom and dad are mad at a kiddo, what are they going to do? Hands on their hips and start pointing their fingers. That kind of thing. Try to explain everything that you're going to do. That way you don't catch them by surprise. And some of the things that might be helpful too, for example, if you're blood pressure, you know, what you're going to use in arms reaching. There's a stethoscope right there where they can grab it at their leisure, they can pick it up, they feel it, they go, that's not going to hurt me. It's not hot, it's not cold, it's not that. And they're more likely to allow you to use that on them. You might practice by kind of showing, this is what I'm going to do, and do it on yourself. Again, with kiddos, don't lie to them. Respect their modesty, so if you have to disrobe them, be prepared to robe them quickly. Use parents as your conduit to talk to them and calm the child and allow them to stand or sit in mommy and daddy's lap if it's not a contraindication. And again, allow a child to keep familiar objects. So if they got a favorite blanket that they don't ever separate them from, and now I'm hurt, and now you're strapping me down, and you've taken my blanket away, and you've taken my mommy away from me, good luck. I'm not going to tell you anything. All right, with the elderly, again, find out what their name is, and don't call them by their first name unless they're first called by that. Use last name. Again, be careful with slang and maybe sound cool around your 20-year-old buddies and stuff like that, because that's what you always use. Don't assume that they're stupid and they're blind and they're deaf. Again, we talked about rushing a patient. are still as smart as they used to be in most cases. It's just their neuronal firing is just slowed down a little bit, so they need more time to process information. And also be prepared to attend to the family. That's really important too. And we have documentation next. I really don't have a, we're supposed to do some practice on this, I really don't have any material for that. So we'll do the lecture and open it up for any questions and any comments you got, okay? Alright, one of the things that probably will get you in trouble faster than anything you do is your documentation or lack of documentation, okay? So, that's why Ms. Quintanilla is really picky. She wants you to develop good documentation skills early on. If you can do it at the level of the EMT, then you'll carry on into your intermediate level, your paramedic level, and decide to go to nursing school and things like that. You're going to realize how important documentation is. So some of the purposes of documentation are a continuity of patient care. There may be some regulatory requirements. In other words, they look at tracking times and how fast it will take you to get the calls and how many IVs you start and things like that. All insurance also does that kind of stuff. Somebody's checking your reports to make sure you're documented correctly. There's some research things behind it. Justification of treatment, we find that the SAC protocol saying this, we're not really doing that, we're doing something else. Maybe the protocol itself needs to be changed and revised. It's a big source of protection for you. In other words, remember what we did very early on, if you didn't document it, then in the eyes of the court, it probably wasn't done. Alright, so a good medical record is accurate above all things. You should document facts and observations only. Now, should we put our impression of what we think was wrong with the patient there? Mm-hmm. Like, should we ever write in a report the patient was intoxicated or drunk? Let's say we knew they were intoxicated drunk because we know what intoxicated drunk is because we behave the same way. Is it okay to write that report? Man, if I'm an attorney, opposing attorney, I'm going to say, I noticed that you listed the patient was intoxicated. And they're going to start ripping you a new one after that. You're going to say, okay, I need the definition of intoxication. Well, you can spout out, well, by Texas it says 0.08 or whatever, legal intoxication. Okay, can I see your toxicology report? Can I see your blood lab work? Can I see your little breathing device? And I don't have any of that. Well, exactly what did you use to determine he was intoxicated? He was just drunk. Well, that's not good enough. Okay? You should also double check numerical entries. This is where you get in a lot of trouble, especially if we're listing medications and we gave 5 milligrams of albuterol sulfate for breathing treatment, and we put 0.5 milligrams, or we put 50 milligrams of albuterol. Oh, in one case you gave way too little, in the other case you gave way too much. Okay. You should recheck spellings. Medical terminology is hard enough to say as it is, and it's really hard to spell in some cases. So make sure that your system has some kind of medical spell check program. And if it doesn't, then have a medical terminology book next to you so you can kind of check your spellings. Should you document an error? or should you just kind of hope it goes away?
Document.
You need to document the fact that an error was made, and you might want to attach an explanation as to why it was made, or what looks to be an error, but it's not really an error. We just deviated the protocol, and this is why we did it. All right, continuing. A good medical record is complete if the lines are there to fill in are completed. So you probably need to look at your patient care report, and there shouldn't be any blanks. There should be something written in there. Now, don't write false information, but a response that's there for a reason. It says to include at least 2 sets of vital signs on every patient. And it also says that failure to document is failure to investigate. Always document pertinent negatives. In other words, what else are we looking for in this patient's case? And again, it says it right there. If it wasn't documented, then it wasn't done. And the reality is some of these things will come back to haunt you in 2 years. And can you remember what you did 2 years ago? I can't. All right, we kind of talked about legibility. And we talked about penmanship and the fact that that's a kind of a dying art, and we just aren't very good at that anymore. And it really shows, especially in some of your writing. I've seen it already. So documents presented in court must speak for themselves. Okay. So if I get a report and it's very neatly documented, then I kind of think, well, I'm kind of give you credit right off the bat for penmanship. Okay. So I should be able to go over the patient care report and have a sense of I was there and I know what happened because your documentation is that good. Again, sloppy report can equate to sloppy care. So remember again to recheck your spellings. And if the document can't be deciphered because of your penmanship or your spelling or crowding the words, and we tend to crowd words, especially if we can't spell them because we're trying to hide our errors, don't we? You've done it before. You write something, you go, I don't know how to spell, so I'll just crumble all the letters together and let them try to figure out that I'm a dumbass, right? All right. It should be free of extraneous information, so avoid labeling patients like, again, this is the town drunk, or this is the patient we pick up every shift. You don't document that. So all we do is kind of report observations. The patient walked with a staggered gait. They were slurring their words. They couldn't stand without assistance. Does that sound like an intoxicated patient or signs and symptoms of intoxication? You be the judge. You figure it out, but I didn't say you were intoxicated. I just reported what I saw. Preface statements as per the witness or per the patient. And I may have shared with you that I had a patient that was involved in a motorcycle wreck and ended up his passenger died as a result of him being intoxicated. We all knew he was drunk, but his buddy died. And when we're transporting the patient to the hospital, he said to me, I had way, way too much to drink. Is it okay to put that in the report? Yeah, I'm going to say, per the patient, he said he had too much to drink. And again, you really don't want to be funny in the report, and so you should avoid humor in the report. Okay, good documentation reflects good patient care. And I think it's important that you write the report as soon as run after possible. Why is that?
Still fresh.
Yeah, absolutely. If you show up and you're riding out with Scott and White as an example, and you bang right out of as soon as you get there, you make a call, and that's your first of 18 calls for the shift. And you wait till the end of the shift to document all these patients. Are you going to remember that? Or are these things going to kind of merge and commingle? That's exactly what will happen. If it needs to be corrected, then correct it. And again, the earlier the correction is made, the more reliable the change. And that's a test question. If you make an error, ahead and draw a single line through the error and initial it. That's what you should do. For some reason, if your report is long and lengthy, go ahead and add additional pages to it. And again, it says avoid steady diagnostic impressions. Can we say, you know what's going to happen at the end of this class? You're going to look at a patient that's a trauma patient, and we're going to tell you what to look for in a tension pneumothorax, for example. And you're going to say he's got JVD, he's got diminished breath sounds on the right side of the chest, he's got a flail chest, his sats are low, and he's got hypertympany on the right side of the chest. Those are all signs and symptoms of what? A tension pneumothorax. And those are the kind of things you can put on the report. Now, because you know all that and it looks like a tension pneumothorax and there's a mechanism for it, can you go ahead and report and write the patient had a tension pneumothorax? The answer is no. Can I write all the signs and symptoms that I saw that indicate it could have been a tension pneumothorax? The answer is yes. Okay, and again, the other one is if you think they've got a subdural hematoma, brain injury, and about the only way that's going to be definitively diagnosed is with a CT scan. Again, is that within our scope of training? You don't want to use possible when you know it's fact. For example, if I have somebody that's got deformity to the forearm after a fall, and I can hear it grinding, bone ends grinding against each other, do they have a fracture of their forearm? I think they do, but I'm not really sure. On the other hand, if you look and bone ends are sticking out, you have a fracture. Well, he has a fracture. Can we go ahead and put it in the report? You don't put possible fracture when you know it is a fracture. All right, if you are, in other words, if you're treating an asthma patient, then your signs and symptoms and indicators should be there. Okay. If something should have been done but was not, say why. In other words, should we take blood pressure in our patients? And why didn't you take a blood pressure? I don't know. There could be a reason you didn't take a blood pressure, so you need to indicate that. The other part is, a lot of times they're looking for these times, and they want to make sure that, we're on scene a reasonable time. Now, sometimes you may have been on scene for 40 minutes. Is that acceptable? It may not be in your protocols. So if there's a reason you stayed on scene for 4 minutes, maybe we had a hostage situation, and it took a while to get this patient calmed down, yeah, they need to know that. The last kind of times are to be documented on your report, then you should do that accurately. And again, when you go back and get that information, those times are already stamped for you. All you're doing is transferring times, or it's already embedded in your report in some way. Because all of our reports are via computer. A lot of them are just gone from paperless, and they've gone electronic. All right, and when we talk about patient refusals, it says you should perform a patient assessment if the patient will allow you. Again, they have to give you permission, right? And sometimes they may not give you that permission. It says try to persuade the patient to accept treatment and transport if indicated. If you think they need to be transported, then try and convince them of that. Okay? And you really need to explain what is wrong to them, risk of not seeking treatment. Sir, you've got a laceration to your side of your head, and your buddy said that you were unconscious for about 2 minutes before we got here. You go, what does that mean? Well, it means that you could have bleeding inside your brain, and you could die from that. So explain that to them, okay? And they go, well, what's the point of me going to the hospital? Well, you know, they can do a CT scan and find a bleed, and if they can find it quickly, you know, they can start the treatment. And any alternatives to treatment and transportation. Again, if you don't want to go with us, your friend's going to watch you. If anything changes about you, we've already told them what to look for, and you can always call us back. All right. If the patient still refuses treatment, you need to document it, their decision, your assessment, and that's a test question. That whole first bullet. Any attempts made to convince the patient to accept treatment and transport. In other words, don't just get a person to sign a document and say, you don't want to go to the hospital? No, sir, I don't. Sign here. Again, what did I tell you? All the stuff in between needs to be documented. Like, I told you what was wrong with you, what I thought was wrong with you. I told you what could happen. These are your alternatives to treatment. Again, if you have any other problems, then call us back. We'll come back and get you. And again, document the patient refusal and obtain their signature. Again, do they have to sign your document? No. They do not. And again, we mentioned this before. If they don't sign it, have the document signed by first family, and then I would say maybe bystander, and then maybe law enforcement. And that's kind of the preference I would select. All right, let's make sure we're all on the same sheet of music here. I think we're kind of getting caught up. Okay, you guys are touring Scott and White on Saturday? All right. It kind of looks like, I'm sorry? Okay. Probably, I mean, I don't want you to waste any more gas than you have to. My option would be that you guys just meet us at the hospital. Because what's going to happen is the Taylor class will come down on Saturday. You guys will merge together, and we'll take you on a tour through the emergency department. And then what we'll do after that is we'll meet back here, and we'll be practicing skills all day long. Okay? So you probably, if you haven't printed out your skill sheets, you probably need to go ahead and print your skill sheets, especially the patient assessment and the vital signs skill sheets. Okay? And again, I'm working Friday, which means I get off Saturday morning at 8 o'clock, which means I can't be here at 8 o'clock. So I think if we haven't made the rule yet on Saturdays, we'll meet at 8:30. That way, I don't look like I'm late. So does everybody know how to get to the emergency department at Scott and White? Anybody not know how to get there? Well, just which route do you come in at? Off the 5th? Where do you come from, north or south? You come off the loop or off the interstate? Off the loop? Well, before you get to 5th Street, take 31st Street exit. Okay? And when you get to 31st Street, you'll see a sign that says Emergency Department. And the Emergency Department is on the southernmost part of the hospital. Okay? And then just go at the parking area right there. And you guys wait for us in the, you can wait for us outside, or you can wait for us inside the waiting area, okay? And just kind of be pleasant, don't be ugly, don't be profane, all that kind of crap. And they probably don't want you parking in the immediate parking areas around the emergency department. So there's an adjunct parking area right next to it on the other side of the road. That's probably a better place for us to park, okay? If there aren't that many people in the parking lot, I didn't see you. If you want to park there, that's fine, but I'm telling you, if there's already a lot of cars there, and be courteous, because those parking spots are for patients that are there to visit family and stuff like that. We won't be there that long. We'll probably be there for 30, 40, maybe 45 minutes to do the tour, and then we'll come back over here. All right? Any questions? What quizzes are due for Saturday? Vital signs. All right, make sure you get that done.
Do we need to wear the temple ID badge that night?
There is no special uniform required, just don't look skanky.
Hear that?